The Argos Catalogue was one of the great British books of the late 20th century, which is a stupid sentence until you remember how people actually used it. It was not literature, not design, not journalism, not exactly advertising. It was a brick of desire. A laminated slab of possible ownership, usually too heavy for its own spine, passed around living rooms with a biro nearby and a child slowly losing all sense of proportion. You did not read the Argos Catalogue. You entered it. You made claims on it. You circled things. You folded pages. You treated it less like a shop and more like a private weather system of wanting. Argos launched its catalogue in 1973 and stopped printing the main version in 2020, after 93 editions and more than 1 billion copies. At one point, circulation had been enormous enough for the thing to feel less like retail and more like infrastructure. By the time it ended, Argos said shopping habits had moved online, which was true, but also too plain to explain the grief. Nobody mourned the loss of product information. They mourned the loss of a ritual. That ritual had very little glamour. This was part of its genius. The catalogue did not flatter you. It did not invite you into a boutique fantasy where everything had been arranged by a tasteful person with linen trousers and a tiny coffee. It offered kettles, bikes, jewelry, calculators, paddling pools, microwaves, Casio keyboards, curtain poles, bunk beds, exercise bikes, camera bags, hairdryers, garden furniture, home phones, watches, toys, televisions, and inexplicable gadgets for men who own trouser presses. The whole democratic ugliness of it was the point. Here was consumer Britain stripped of seduction and yet somehow more seductive for it. A department store tells you what kind of person you might become if you had more money and better lighting. The Argos Catalogue told you what you might get if you had £24.99, a patient parent, and a willingness to queue near a laminated pen. That was the first strange power of it. It made ownership feel close. Not easy. Not guaranteed. Close. The object would not arrive beautifully wrapped. It would come from the back. That phrase alone had a kind of magic. The back. Somewhere behind the counter, beyond the little collection point, there was an unseen warehouse where every ordinary dream had a stock number. You filled in a slip, handed it over, watched the tiny screen, and waited for your number to be called. This was shopping as ceremony without luxury. You did not browse shelves. You summoned goods. Argos was born out of Green Shield stamps, which makes sense, because it always retained the feeling of redemption. Richard Tompkins had built the stamp scheme before converting the catalogue shop idea into a cash retail model, rebranding the shops as Argos in 1973. The British Museum's company note gives the simple version. Tompkins founded Argos in 1973 after Green Shield stamps, with the first purpose-built shop opening in Canterbury that year. That origin matters because Argos never quite lost the mood of the stamp book. It still felt as if purchase required translation. You did not simply take the thing from the shelf. You moved through codes, slips, counters, laminated pages, stock checks. The product existed first as an image, then as a number, then as a promise, then as a box. That gave even dull objects an interval of suspense. A toaster on a normal shop shelf is just a toaster. A toaster in the Argos catalogue is a decision. A small domestic future. White or chrome? 2-slice or 4-slice? Cheap one now or better one if everyone agrees the old one really is finished. The catalogue took ordinary goods and made them audition. This is why Bill Bailey's phrase, the laminated book of dreams, stuck so hard. It is funny because it exaggerates, but only slightly. The catalogue was not a dream because the objects were grand. It was a dream because everything was flattened into equal possibility. A Sega Mega Drive, a garden shed, a pair of earrings, a rowing machine, a SodaStream, a cot, a watch, and a bathroom cabinet could sit in the same universe, using the same typography, waiting for the same little stock check machine to approve or deny them. The catalogue's real subject was not shopping. It was wanting without narrative. Most advertising tells a story. Buy this and become attractive. Buy this and become efficient. Buy this and become loved. Argos barely bothered. It often looked like products had been photographed under the emotional supervision of an insurance clerk. The page did not say, "Imagine a better life." It said, "Here are 12 clocks." And somehow that was more powerful. Because it left the fantasy to you. A child with the Christmas catalogue did not need a lifestyle campaign. The toy pages were already too much. Every item had the clean violence of a wish. You could look at action figures, board games, dolls, bikes, remote control cars, chemistry sets, computer games, and trampolines until your own desires became embarrassing to you. Not because you wanted one thing too much, but because you wanted everything at once. This is the part adults forget when they talk about nostalgia. The Argos catalogue was not cozy at the time. It was agonizing. It trained children in comparison, ranking, compromise, lobbying, and disappointment. You did not merely choose presents. You learned the awful mathematics of wanting. If you asked for the big thing, you might lose 3 medium things. If you circled too much, the list looked unserious. If you circled too little, you had failed to use the miracle properly. The catalogue was a childhood parliament. Every page had constituencies. The old scans proved this better than memory can. Retro Mashers archive and Internet Archive uploads are not valuable because they show a few funny old products. They are valuable because they preserve the density of the thing. Page after page of tightly packed goods, small photographs, brutal pricing, occasional models, and the quiet evidence of what Britain thought it needed in a given year. RetroMash calls the catalogues a snapshot of a bygone era and points out how properties and product photos lingered for years. The Internet Archive holds full catalogue scans from years such as 1985, 1989, 1990, 1992, and 1993. This is where the catalogue becomes more interesting than mere nostalgia. It was a map of aspiration, but not an elite one. The aspiration was modest, crowded, and practical. It was not asking whether you wanted to be rich. It was asking whether your life might be slightly improved by a cordless screwdriver, a hi-fi with detachable speakers, a glass TV stand, a garden lounger, a personal stereo, a slow cooker, or a watch that looked expensive from across a room. There is a politics in that, though not the kind that announces itself. The Argos catalogue was mass-market fantasy for people who did not necessarily have access to more elegant fantasy. It placed a thin layer of choice over class limits. It did not abolish those limits. It made them browsable. That is why the jewelry pages were so important. Argos jewelry, especially Elizabeth Duke, occupied a strange place in British taste. It was affordable glamour with a slight social penalty attached. Everyone knew what it was. Everyone also knew why people bought it. It existed in that awkward zone where an object can be both cherished and faintly mocked. Argos became a major jewelry retailer in the 1980s through its Elizabeth Duke counter, which tells you something about the scale of the operation and the appetite it served. The old Argos catalogue is full of those double feelings. Affection and embarrassment. Hope and cheapness. Practicality and fantasy. A lot of British consumer life sits there. A watch page could be moving because nobody involved intended it to be moving. Rows of men's watches with little gold faces and names trying to sound more continental than they were. A gift set with a pen. A lady's bracelet watch with just enough sparkle. The page says nothing about love, status, birthdays, fathers, girlfriends, Christmas morning, apology, pride, or panic. Yet all of those things are there, because why else is anyone buying a boxed watch at 4.30 on a Thursday from a shop where the product arrives through a hatch? The catalogue understood the emergency gift better than almost any retailer. It was built for ordinary crisis. Forgotten birthdays. Broken kettles. Child suddenly needs a calculator. Television died. Hairdryer packed in. Christmas has become real. Someone is moving into a flat and owns nothing except a duvet and a mug from work. Argos was where people went when modern life needed an object quickly and without poetry. That made the catalogue a fantasy of control. Not pleasure exactly. Control. Everything was numbered. Everything had a price. Everything had a small photograph. Everything appeared to belong to a system. The world outside might be unstable, but here, at least, a microwave had a code. A code could be written down. A stock checker could say yes or no. The answer might be disappointing, but it would be legible. This is what the internet improved and ruined. Online shopping kept the stock check, the range, the search, the convenience. It removed the shared physical theater. You can buy more now, faster, at stranger hours, with more reviews, more images, more discounts, more anxiety, more tabs open, more suspicion that a better version exists elsewhere. The old catalogue gave you abundance, but bounded abundance. It had edges. It had a front and back cover. It could be exhausted. You could say, falsely but comfortingly, I've looked through Argos. Nobody has ever finished Amazon. That is the difference. The printed Argos catalogue had limits, and limits are underrated in desire. A finite catalogue makes wanting theatrical. An infinite marketplace makes wanting administrative. The Argos book could overwhelm you, but it did so within a room, on a lap, with pages turning and someone else wanting a look. The internet has made ownership easier while making wanting more restless. That is why the end of the catalogue felt culturally larger than the end of a sales channel. The Guardian reported in 2020 that circulation had fallen from about 10 million to about 3 million over the previous decade, and that Argos would move attention toward digital shopping while keeping a Christmas gift guide. Those numbers tell the business story. The emotional story is that the catalogue had already been replaced by something more efficient and less memorable. Argos tried, rather brilliantly, to make one last public use of the myth before killing the main object. Its 2019 Christmas campaign put the catalogue back at the center, leaning into the Book of Dreams idea. Trade coverage at the time noted that Argos had launched an online archive of annual catalogues going back to 1974 and that the Nostalgia Hub drew huge early traffic. That archive response is revealing. People did not only want to remember products. They wanted to revisit the old arrangement of wanting. The pages mattered because they restored the scale of childhood desire. The cheap toys. The big-ticket electronics. The things nobody bought but everybody examined. The family negotiations implied by every price. Reddit threads about old Argos catalogues are not especially profound, and they do not need to be. They mostly have the right texture, people sharing scans, remembering Christmas lists, lamenting the dead Book of Dreams site, talking about downloadable PDFs, and using the catalogue as a time machine rather than as a price list. That is the common take because it is the honest one. The object now works best as evidence of how people used to imagine getting things. The mistake would be to treat this as simple anti-digital nostalgia. The Argos catalogue was not more innocent than the internet. It was an engine of consumer desire, and a very effective one. It made children greedy. It made adults feel briefly capable. It made homes into inventories of missing things. It trained people to see life as a sequence of purchasable upgrades. More storage. Better sound. Cleaner carpets. Hotter toast. Newer phone. Bigger television. Neater garden. Fitter body. Shinier wrist. There is nothing pure about that. But there was a kind of social honesty in how plain it was. The catalogue did not pretend consumption was self-care, ethical identity, creative expression, or personal optimization. It said, here is the stuff. Here is the price. Do you want it or not? Modern retail often wraps the same transaction in a fog of moral improvement. The Argos catalogue had almost no fog. It was too blunt to flatter itself. This bluntness gave it comic grandeur. Every object was photographed as if it had been summoned for questioning. A sandwich toaster. A hostess trolley. A Casio keyboard. A rowing machine that would spend 11 years folded behind a door. A set of cordless phones. A novelty alarm clock. A gemstone globe. A bread maker. A foot spa. The catalogue did not rank these objects emotionally. It trusted the page to flatten them, and the customer to re-inflate them with private longing. That is why browsing it felt different from looking at adverts. Adverts try to dominate the imagination. The Argos Catalogue gave the imagination a warehouse. Its great visual form was accumulation. Not beauty. Accumulation. The toy pages were exciting because there were too many toys. The jewelry pages were mesmerizing because there were too many little boxes. The electronics pages had the sacred clutter of buttons, screens, speakers, remote controls, wires, and promises. You did not admire one product. You admired the possibility that life could be solved by enough products arranged in the right order. That is the fantasy of owning everything. Not having everything. Nobody really believed that. The fantasy was that everything could be known, priced, compared, and maybe approached. The catalogue turned the consumer world into a manageable list. It said abundance could be domesticated. You could place it on the coffee table. You could carry it home. You could open it at page 742 and decide what kind of person you might be if the stockroom said yes. There is a little sadness in that, but not only sadness. There is also a rough, democratic tenderness. For many families, Argos was not about excess. It was about making limited money feel powerful for a moment. A birthday present chosen carefully. A Christmas list negotiated down to the possible. A new appliance bought because the old one finally gave up. A first stereo. A first watch. A child's bike. A cot. A kettle for a student room. These are not glamorous purchases, but ordinary life is mostly built out of unglamorous purchases. The Argos Catalogue treated those purchases as worthy of display. That is why its ugliness now looks almost noble. The cramped layouts, tiny product shots, overlit models, weird domestic gadgets, and hard little prices all belong to a Britain that did not yet know how to make every act of buying look aspirational. It could be tacky, yes. It could be cheap. It could be absurd. It could also be generous in range, patient in detail, and weirdly respectful of ordinary wanting. A glossy lifestyle magazine tells you your life is wrong. The Argos Catalogue told you your life needed batteries. That is a smaller claim, and sometimes a kinder one. The catalogue died because it had to. The business case for printing millions of enormous product books had weakened, and the online version did the functional job better. But the digital Argos site cannot become the same kind of memory. Nobody will lovingly recall scrolling through filters. Nobody will remember the emotional weight of a search result. Nobody will say, with real feeling, that the checkout page caught the tears of joy. The book had heft, and heft counts. It sat in houses. It took up space. It could be stolen from the shop with no moral drama because everyone knew another one would appear. It absorbed boredom. It mediated Christmas. It let siblings argue. It let parents say, circle what you like, which sounded generous and was also a controlled experiment in expectation management. It taught British children that desire should be expressed in biro. The Argos Catalogue deserves remembering not because it was beautiful, but because it was accurate. It caught a whole national relationship with stuff, hopeful, embarrassed, practical, greedy, careful, funny, class-conscious, sentimental, and always slightly worried about price. It was the book of dreams, yes, but the dreams were not especially grand. That was their force. A bigger television. A better kettle. A bike. A ring. A toy garage. A stereo. A watch. A thing for the garden. A thing for the kitchen. A thing that might make January less grey. The fantasy was never really owning everything. The fantasy was that everything you wanted could fit inside a book, and that for a few minutes, with the pages open in front of you, the wanting itself felt almost as good as possession.